It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. America's best days are yet to come.
This is the Caesar Rodney Institute Policy Podcast. CRI Communications Director Sam Friedman talks with Michael Petrilli, president of the Fordham Institute, about their controversial support of Common Core. Here's Sam.
Here in Delaware, we have a huge movement. Both the left and the right are opposed to it, and we just had a bill voted in the House. Why do you think so many parents are going with this?
Well, first of all, I think we need to be clear that this is still a very small minority of parents who are opting out. There's a handful of states, namely New York and New Jersey, where the numbers have been quite large. In both of those places, the teachers' unions spent millions of dollars on a campaign to encourage parents to opt out. Where the unions have not been putting money into campaigns like that, it's really been just a handful here or there, maybe an occasional community where this has really caught fire. So I think we have to keep it in perspective, that it's in most places an isolated phenomenon. Look, I think that that parents are coming to this from lots of different perspectives. I think it means that parents are concerned about what's happening in their schools, and they believe that part of what's driving changes that they don't like are the tests that their kids are being asked to take. And so I think if you dig in, it probably get a different answer from every parent that is participating in the opt-out. But common answers that you hear is parents are worried that schools are responding to these tests by narrowing the curriculum, by getting rid of history and science, art and music, or at least teaching a lot less of it. That there's concerns that particularly when you tie these tests to teachers' evaluations, that you're putting a lot of pressure on the teachers to ignore everything but reading and math, which is what gets tested. And if that is what's happening in these schools, the parents are right to be upset. That it's a real problem if schools are narrowing the curriculum. That's certainly not the intent of any of these policies. If
you have states that are saying that they're doing all of these things that are not supposed to be a part of the Common Core, but they're doing it and then blaming any failure on it, what is the motivation? Are they just trying to dodge responsibility, in your opinion?
No, look, I think that, first of all, we know from polls that most teachers actually like the Common Core standards themselves. They think that they're better than the standards that were in place before, that they're more teachable, they allow them to go more in depth, and in many ways they address the concerns that many parents have, that they actually are broader in a way than allowed, if done right, for schools to go back to teaching history and science and art and music in a way that they haven't under the No Child Left Behind Act. So teachers tend to like the standards. Where the teachers tend to protest is around the testing, and in particularly using the testing to hold them accountable. And there's a lot of fear about that. Now, I personally think that some of that fear is well-founded. I think that we have just started on this movement to try to tie test scores to teachers' evaluations, and we need to be humble here. I mean, there are some legitimate concerns with that if you have you only have 20, 25, 30 kids in your class, using test scores is going to be somewhat risky. Those scores tend to bounce around a lot. A couple of kids have a bad day, and it can really swing your results. And so we do have to make sure that those test scores are not an overwhelming part of the evaluation, because there are some technical problems with them.
You look at some of the candidates, let's say on the Republican side, where Common Core has become somewhat of a litmus test, and it seems like, and we know that Governor Bush, he supports him, but a lot of the other candidates are almost like they're trying to either run away from it or have it both ways. Why do you think so many elected officials are trying to play this balancing act and try to move away? Is that something that you think is going to affect the election, either party's primary?
Well, it's interesting. When you look at what's happening around the politics, it's like a split screen. On the one hand, as you said, you've got the Republican candidates, by and large, attacking the Common Core. And that is, of course, because that position is popular with the base of the Republican Party, the Tea Party base. On the other hand, when you look at the states and look at what's happened over the last several months in the states, every single repeal effort has failed. That state after state, including very red states that have Republican legislatures, that have Republican governors, they have chosen to stick with the Common Core. So the Republican leadership in those states has decided that they are better off staying the course. Now, what's happening? Partly it's that the business wing of the Republican Party has stood up and said, we care about this. We care about higher standards. We don't want to be the state that goes back to lower standards. We don't want to be Oklahoma. That's what Oklahoma did last year. Now, the Republicans are trying to figure out, how do you straddle the position of the business guys versus the position of the Tea Party folks. And what many of them have said is, all right, look, we want to make sure we have high standards. If people have concern with the Common Core, let's review them. Let's have a committee go out and take a hard look.
I work a lot with here in Delaware with a lot of parental groups, people who are both pro and a lot of folks who are against it. And there is definitely a disconnect between the Chamber of Commerce, sometimes what people perceive that they want versus what the rest of the public wants. Are you concerned or not concerned that the Common Core and the whole concept of the standards is being perceived to be something that's more like a political class decision as opposed to something that most people want? Or is that perception inaccurate?
I think there's a ton of misconceptions about the Common Core. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think that is driving some of the opposition. I think there's also legitimate concerns about it. I, for example, have been concerned about the federal role around Common Core. So I think that the Tea Party folks and the parent groups are right to be worried about that. Now, it's interesting, when you push the Republican candidates on their position on Common Core, and what would they do as president, they all say the same thing, which is get the federal government out of this. They don't say that they would, outlaw Common Core in every state. To other conservatives, what I say is, look, it has been conservatives for 30 years who have said we need more accountability in public education. Parental choice, definitely. We all agree about that. But that we also have been pushing for higher standards, for real accountability, because we know that if we just leave it up to the education system, it's so dominated by the unions and by progressives, by the ed schools, we're not going to get what we need for our young people.
Thank you so much for joining me, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
That was Michael Petrilli, who's the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. You've been listening to the Caesar Rodney Institute Impact Delaware podcast. Visit our website, caesarrodney.org, for all the latest news, research, and policy highlights on issues affecting you. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Sam Friedman. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.